Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Movie Night here on Random Trek. I am your faithful captain, Christopher Ingle, joined as always by my first officer, Brennan, the mystical Mar. Brennan, I think we should have E.T. as our communications officer. What do you think?
Podcast.
He's really good at phoning home.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
This summer we are taking a look at sci-fi classics that we grew up with from the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one we wanted to start with was, I think, um, definitely the film that gave sci-fi movies a more family-friendly touch, thanks to director Steven Spielberg, the 1982 classic E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with this film. This was on all the time on VHS. I remember my aunt, whenever she babysat, this is what we would watch all the time. But we're not alone. We are not alone. Of course, we have a guest every movie night here. And this week we chose a good friend of the show. You'll remember him from our review of Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. He is our lieutenant. He is Mr. Caramel Mountain himself, Ryan Payne. Ryan, how you doing?
I am doing really good. It's really good to be back here with you guys. And I'll be honest, I was kind of surprised with the selection of choice. Not because I don't like it, it's because like most things in my life, like it's something I hadn't watched since childhood. So it was fun to really go back and at
Mm-hmm.
least like see what I recall.
You missed an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity, Ryan. When I said, "How are you doing?" you could have went, "I good."
See?
All right,
Oh
all right.
crap.
This is awful. I would be
I
doing
gotta
stuff like
redeem
this.
myself. I gotta redeem myself.
All right, but Ryan, so tell us a little bit. You wanted to join us. Tell us a little bit about what you remember, feelings wise, emotions. Coming from watching ET.
Okay. As I mentioned, it's been a while since childhood because I used to watch this a lot on VHS as a
Mhm.
kid. This film, I'll admit, uh, at first I was uncomfortable watching the film because of first time watching it, seeing just the way the movie was. Like, I remember like the opening like so vividly.
Mm.
The fact with the alien landing here and just the ambiance of the music playing. I just remember sitting on a couch with my family watching it, and I think I was the only one who had like my knees up to my chest, just like a little, almost a little scared, like what was going on. But but then of course the rest of the film goes on. I definitely loved every. I really loved it. It laid a huge impact on my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, Great to hear. Yeah, and I know Brennan and I grew up watching this. This was another one that was pretty
Mm-hmm.
regular. And we as movie fans, I mean, Spielberg comes up a lot for us. So to have this film when he's coming off of, I'm not going to call them family films, coming off of Raiders and Jaws, and these very very different films.
1941. Yeah.
1941, yeah.
I
E.T.
forget
was
he does
very
that.
different. Yeah, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people do, but it's very different. And I arguably also very different from a later sci-fi classic, or a sci-fi classic of Close Encounters.
Mm.
So, really interesting here. But as always, it's movie night, so I turn it over to Commander Brennan.
All right. So E.T. was released on June 11th, 1982. In the same month, by the way, Poltergeist, Star Trek II, Blade Runner, and The Thing all came out in the same month. 1982 is one of the greatest years in cinema. E.T. cost $10 million to make. It made $800 million in theaters.
Mhm.
It was the highest grossing film of all time until another Spielberg film, Jurassic Park, 11 years later. So, we are going to break down this classic, which I think that it goes without saying that this movie is a classic. It's so very much a part of many people's childhoods.
Mhm.
And this is also a product of the 80s when family films could be kind of freaky, if you think about it. This movie can be really terrifying. And it's interesting because the films made for young audiences at the time were a little intense by modern standards. All right, so we're going to break down the movie into 6 categories, as we do: story, character, screenplay, themes, music, and spectacle. So we're going to start with the story and the plot. Everyone who knows anything about E.T. knows the story of this film. Little aliens left on Earth, he becomes friends with the humans. He's got to get back home while the government is chasing after him.
Mm-hmm.
It's fairly straightforward. So what I would like to do is discuss the story in the sense of it's the story of a broken family coming together because of this little creature. And it's the story primarily of the relationship between Elliott and E.T. That's really the story at the center. And of course, with the government interested in E.T., but ultimately E.T. goes back with his people, and one of the most beautiful and yet emotionally wrenching endings of all time. I mean, it hits hard, this movie.
Mhm.
So we're not really going to rehash the whole story. So I just want to get your guys' thoughts. We'll start with our guest. Ryan, what are your thoughts on just the overall story of this film?
With my overall thoughts, it does the job. Honestly, it executes exactly what the story was meant to be. Yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
summed it up right. Aliens left behind, makes friends, but at the heart, I love how it really takes its time once it knows where the real story is, like the bond
Mm-hmm.
between E.T. and Elliot, also having his sister and his older brother like get involved. They're just seeing these siblings like all bond together. Like
Mm-hmm.
this really does make it feel like a true like family unit, and I like how they are healed along the way with ET's influence. It honestly it reminds me bits with my siblings, you know, like with the high, like when not like we ever hit an alien from our parents, but it's kind of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
we find a stray dog we wanted to keep, you know,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we're trying to
Mm-hmm.
hide it from our parents, you know. So I took some certain analogies of that with ET when I look back at this film.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting analogy because I think a lot of kids have had that experience. But can we keep that? You know, we found it. Can we keep it?
Hmm.
You know, kind of mentality. And one of the things that's interesting is you're absolutely right. And we'll get to this in a minute when we talk about the screenplay. The movie takes its time. This is not a fast movie, and it's not a slow movie. It plays it exactly the right length because any longer would be too long, any shorter would be too short. And that opening, you mentioned the first, like, I don't know, 15 minutes of the movie, it's just this opening, and it starts out very, very slow with E.T. wandering around the forest. These majestic shots of the redwood trees and things like that. You get just it takes its time at the opening with giving you kind of the setup of these alien botanists exploring Earth and the beauty of nature And then, bam, the government shows up and all heck breaks loose. It's an interesting contrast in the way between the aliens and being a very natural species. They like to garden, they like plants, and sort of the world of human machines and also human suspicion. It's a very interesting contrast in the story. That immediately from the get-go, you get that feeling. And then once E.T. meets Elliott, which is initially very freaky, the bond that develops between them is allowed to play out in just the right amount of time. Chris, what are your thoughts on the story of this film?
I really love you're right on the timing, because it does feel a little slow starting out. It does. I had a hard time. It took me I'll be honest, took me a couple tries to get through the beginning of the film, because it is slow. It builds up, and that's a Spielberg thing. Spielberg knows how to do that. He does it well. But I love what at the heart this is a friendship. And a friendship that was created out of unconventional means. And yet, even though they are different from each other, they love each other. They care about each other. And the having this empathetic connection between them is a nice twist and touch. Because it's not just, oh, I need to hide this alien. No, there's a deeper connection here.
Yeah.
There's a deeper understanding here. And it really works to get the fact that we want kids to understand empathy. We want them to.
Yes.
Well, Elliott is forced to experience empathy. Not that he wasn't that kind of kid, but when we talk about a broken family, this is a kid who's not experiencing that at home.
Oh, yes.
Not his mom's fault. I think his mom is okay. It's not like she's a horrible, terrible, no.
She's very much a mom.
Yeah. She's struggling to get through what they need to get through. And so overall, this story works because it hits the heart where it needs to, when it needs to, and you don't have to question it.
Yeah. And it's visual storytelling primarily. We'll talk about the script in a minute. We'll talk about how the dialogue is more incidental than meaningful. And we'll get there in a second. So let's get to the heart of the movie, the characters. There's a fairly small cast. We, of course, let's begin at the top with two characters in particular, Elliott, played by Henry Thomas, and E.T. brought to life with some incredible puppeteering, animatronics, and visual effects. Extraordinary. So, Chris, I'll throw it to you first. Let's begin with them, because the two of them are the heart of this movie. Well, let's start really with Henry Thomas. So what are your thoughts on the character and the performance that he gives?
It's really innocent. And by the way, I keep forgetting he's 10. I feel like he's older in this. There is a wisdom and maturity that I like about him.
True.
That I really buy. He's not this irritating little kid, not like his sister. No offense, Drew. She's cute. But there are moments. We'll get to her in a second. There are moments I'm a little irritated by her. I'm like, shut up. But I love the combination of innocence, and yet it feels like he's someone who's seen some things. And his performance is just that nice balance. And again, Spielberg knows how to work with his actors, and he knows how to work with children.
Yeah, oh yes.
So I really, really like the work that we get out of all of these kids, all of them. But Henry especially, I don't feel like I'm looking at a kid. There is a genuine nature to his performance that allows you as the viewer to be empathetic towards him. Again, this is about empathy. This
Yeah.
film is about feeling and understanding and listening, and we as an audience feel for Elliott.
Yeah. Now,
Exactly.
the other side of the coin, E.T. as a character is so believable as this character, particularly to the kids when they were filming the movie. But to them, it was real because of the way that E.T. is brought to life is such a seamless existence. So, what are your thoughts on E.T. himself as a character and how he's brought to life in this film?
Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
I was gonna say, well, I mean, we might have the same, we might share the same opinion on this, but honestly, they really did him so well. I mean, I can understand why when learning about behind the scenes why they thought he was so real, but because they put a lot of heart into the performance and every movement, there wasn't just like a thought behind it, there was a feeling behind it. Like, I mean, the one scene I think of is when he and Elliot not just first meet outside, when Elliot brings him into his garage, right, with the Reese's, with the candy, just the way that they're kind of staring, looking at each other, trying to understand each other, and then Elliot, kind of uses
Yeah,
his
Elliot tilts his head and he does that thing with it. Yeah.
and it lures it, and he lulls it to sleep.
Yeah.
It's like one of those moments is great, and then once they have that face off again, just seeing Elliot trying to figure it out, and I love that even though its eyes are big, but when it moves its eyes or when you see them scrunch down or open a little bit, there is some movement like of wonder and curiosity behind ET, which is something I love, which is why he and Elliot work so well together in this movie.
Elliot or E.T. is probably one of the most visually striking creatures it's ever been brought to life. It's just having these big, gigantic eyes and being a complete artificial construct, but even the tiniest movement they were able to manipulate to make it come to life. The way that E.T. moves is very interesting. The way that he sort of waddles on his little feet, they're kind of going back and forth, side to side, as he waddles, and then the way his hands kind of shake as he reaches with those two fingers, and the way that his neck will extend, and then all the silly, wild things that they can do with the ET character. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on ET as a character in terms of putting aside the technical aspects, but as a fully realized character?
It really comes to two things. Number one, I think we also have to thank George Lucas, because you cannot. I don't know for a fact if any of Lucas or Lucas's people worked on this character.
Dennis Muren did.
Okay. But I was like, if you look at Yoda, you look at a lot of the smaller puppets. You look at the Wicket someone wasn't a puppet, but you look at that.
Look at the cantina sequence and
you look at these smaller creatures. I buy it. I buy that E.T. is there and that he is an individual. But again, he and Elliot are one and the same. Again, connecting empathy that we are more alike than we know. And this is a child.
Symbiosis.
It's a child. E.T. is a child.
Yes.
Yeah, he is, very much so.
And I love this. And despite the lack of communication that we get, because his lines are very few. There are not many lines here. We have to rely on those movements and those emotions and the things that it does to play. And it's E.T. is just charming, and then you feel for E.T. You love E.T. When spoiler alert, when E.T. is dying and dies and
Oh, boy.
dies, By the way, you want to talk about childhood trauma?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
You feel for it. You don't want E.T. to die. You don't want Elliott to die. What is going on? What save E.T.? Why are we hurting? You empathize with it. That goes beyond Yoda. Like, and I see this with all the respect to Star Wars. When I see an Empire Strikes Back Yoda, I love Yoda, but I don't feel an empathetic connection to Yoda. Yoda is Yoda, but at the end of the day, I hear Frank Oz and I see a puppet. I just do.
Interesting. Okay.
And again, I love Yoda. This
No,
is not a
I
yop on
agree.
Yoda in
I
any
agree.
way. But E.T. does not feel like that.
He
E.T.
does not feel
feels,
artificial at all.
no,
No.
it feels the natural part of the process. And being that, and we'll get into it, being that the film is always filmed at Elliott and E.T.'s level,
Yeah, that's
Yes,
true.
yeah.
I don't feel we're looking down
The-
on something artificial.
The only adult that we see in full shot is Elliott's mom.
Mom.
Yeah.
And later toward the end, Keys, we get full
Yeah.
shots of Keys.
But even then, when you're introduced to Keys,
When you
though,
introduce the Keys, it's
yeah,
waist down.
he's a giant, you know. Well,
Mhm.
yeah,
And
it
I
is
re-
waist down.
I remember seeing the movie for the first time when I was probably 7. And so just the image of Keys standing there and only seeing him from the waist down, that resonated with me because I think all kids feel that way about adults sometimes. That but all the other adults we don't really get to see in any shot, because you're right, this is a movie about kids. This is a movie about E.T. and Elliott. The adults are just kind of there. Except of course for Mary, and we'll get to her in a minute. So yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. And we got to talk about the voice of E.T. Pat Welsh is an amazing voice that she created for this character. Who is also, by the way, the same lady who was the voice of Belsh, which is the bounty hunter. Well, Princess Leia was disguised as in Return of the Jedi. It's
But
the same voice.
There is a downside to that story, and I feel bad. But again, I'm gonna chalk it to the 1980s. She had to smoke so much
Yeah,
to get those
yeah,
gravelly
she did.
voices. I'm like, that would not
That
fly
would not fly
today.
today, no.
No, and I'm like, I don't know.
But the particular voice is so interesting. And like I said, the dialogue in this movie is not important, but there's a reason why a couple of E.T.'s lines have stood the test of time and are quoted all the time because of that very distinct sound that I don't think you would get if it were just a normal speaking voice, the E.T. phone home. You know, there's a reason that line is one of the most famous lines in movie history. And I think a lot of it has to do with the delivery of the line.
I think more than just delivery, I also believe it has to do with the way they were really like it wasn't like a build up to when he first speaks, but because you see with Henry, you see with the sister and his brother, they're trying to communicate with him, or at least the sister is, and then when she discovers that E.T. is learning to talk,
Yeah.
I like that exchange between the two because she, like a young kid, is like seeing someone like really excited and curious. So when he is finally saying phone or B D, like really going with his alphabet, I really like how it really is like exciting. It's not it's excitement, but more of like the curiosity, excitement, like saying something else. What else are you gonna say?
It's the excitement of watching a toddler say their first words.
Exactly.
Watching my nieces and nephews learn to talk is amazing. And my little niece, it's listening to her say all kinds of things. It's like, it's just exciting.
And it also shows like it was obviously clear that ET, even though it's a child, it had a level of intelligence. But the thing with ET, when we're meeting him, we don't know if this was meant to be a vocal like species. I mean, because he's doing grunts, he's making noises.
Because he doesn't talk for like an hour, maybe?
Yeah.
45 minutes.
I mean, to quote a Star Wars film, the ability to speak doesn't make you intelligent.
Yeah.
But for the fact that ET is able to speak is kind of like for us, especially if a kid's watching this for the first time, that's kind of their way of saying like we could communicate. It's like to them, it's like a sign of there is something, there is intelligence.
And E.T. being like a child is impressionable, like children are.
Brennan, I want to throw something your way. This is side tangent, but I think you will
Okay,
understand my
go ahead.
connection here. Do you believe that this ET, this ET, is also a part of the Star Wars universe?
I'm gonna settle out of Star Wars fans and say no.
Oh, see,
I think it's just a fun little connection.
I know what you're referring to.
Here's my thing. Lucas threw the alien species into the Senate
Yes.
in
Yes, he
episode
did.
1. So
Yes.
to me, that's canon now, going, our universe of the Star Wars universe. What? But no, and then there's the joke, as they're in the alien, or he's in the ghost costume, comes across Yoda and
Yeah.
he seems to recognize him.
Oh,
I'm like,
home.
I see what you did there. I
Or the
see
fact
it.
that ET's teleconnect when you see him moving the plants around, it's like with those two universes connected, it's like, oh, what if it
And
wasn't?
also the Star Wars action figures that Elliott has.
Mm-hmm.
But here's why I
Fun
bring
little
this
detail.
together. Here's why I bring this together. If they're a spacefaring species, or
Mhm.
even if they're explorers, they clearly have some level of intelligence that is higher than our own. They have to.
Yeah,
There's got to be.
it's almost like that E.T. might seem childlike from our point of view, but to his species, maybe that's not what he's like at all.
And I was gonna get to is maybe he's not a child. He's very childlike.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that aspect of it. But maybe this isn't a child. Maybe that's how adults react. He came off as like a child, and I always thought that it was his parents that came and found him, which from a story standpoint makes some sense.
Mm.
You know, I don't know if that's true. That's headcanon for me. But yeah, he's got to have intelligence and emotional connection. He's
Mm-hmm.
got that in spades in this film. Everything he does even feels like exploring. And then building the communication device.
Yes.
Ouch.
Out of my favorite toy as a child.
Yep, the stick and stealth.
I had one of those. That color too.
Yeah, ouch. No, I love the one of the things I mentioned is he's also impressionable. In fact, I'll tell you what I did is so when Elliott's at school, getting ready to actually kill a frog and then dissect it. When I was a kid, they were already dead. But anyhow, so E.T.'s talking on watching TV. Well, he runs into The Quiet Man from director John Ford, starring John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. And he sees the famous kiss. By the way, just for grins, I watched that movie today. I watched E.T. yesterday, and then I watched The Quiet Man today. It's just a fun little thing. And then so in the classroom, Elliott kisses the girl that he has a crush on. It's a really neat way to build a connection, but also to show that E.T. is impressionable like a child. He sees something interesting and he goes, oh, that might be something to try. And I like that because it makes him feel more real. And the last thing I'll say is that E.T. has established himself as one of the most iconic movie characters in history. Everyone knows him, even if they haven't seen the movie. They know who he is, they know what he sounds like, they know what he acts like, and they know that he's got this connection to Elliott. He is one of the most iconic in all of film. And visually, everyone could identify him by his look. Okay, let's talk about Gertie, played by a very, very, very young, like 5-year-old Drew Barrymore. So, Chris, you clearly had some thoughts on this character.
Yeah.
I'll toss it over to you.
I think part of it, I don't mind child actors.
Mm-hmm.
But she comes off as a little too cutesy for my taste, almost to the point that she's irritating. And I hate that scream. I mean, I know it's got to be there. I get it.
Well,
I know why
I
it's
mean, little
there.
girls with annoying
Yeah.
screams. I mean,
Oh, it's just that.
I mean, not that boys can't
That felt
scream
very
too, but
normal for me. That was like very normal for
but
Oh,
me.
if you've got like sisters or daughters, in your case, Chris, now boys can be screamers too,
it's true.
but often girls can be screamers. And I would slightly disagree, just slightly,
mhm.
in the sense that she is supposed to be the annoying little sister. And that's
But
kind of part of the package.
I mean, I definitely agree on that end too. I mean, the fact with Elliot, I mean, you have mentioned that this is meant to be a broken family, but you also see like when you first meet them, it clearly is like Elliot's kind of a bit of an he's kind of isolated from his family. You know,
Hmm.
he has a hard time trying to, not a hard time, but he's having a hard time trying to get himself heard a lot
He's like,
because
hey mom, and she's not paying attention, and
or his older brother, he's like, I'm ready to play, and then his
yeah,
older brother's
and
not
they
paying
all kind of
attention to him.
ignoring him. Yeah,
And yeah, you see, yeah, with Gertie, how easy she's able to be heard because yeah, a very young girl, she doesn't have the quite emotional understanding yet on to control like on the loudness of her voice.
yeah. There's always that.
So yeah, that scream itself, yeah, while it honestly it made sense. I mean, of course, as a kid, I'm like, if I saw something like that, I would scream. And funny thing was that yesterday I was watching just looking at some behind the scenes stuff, and of course, some of the stuff was saying that Gertie and the brothers' reaction to ET was actually genuine because Spielberg made a choice to keep it hidden from them throughout
Mm,
most screenings, so their first reaction was meant to be genuine.
yeah, and I also love the little detail that Gertie likes to repeat what people say to her because my nephew used to do that.
Like, yeah,
He used to always repeat like the end of the sentence somebody would say.
my
It's so
nieces do that
funny, but
constantly.
but one of the things that I like about the character is, yet again, there's another sense of genuine emotion. Obviously, being as young as she was when they filmed this movie, I'm sure in her mind, E.T. was a real thing. And so the emotion that she eventually feels is, I think, very real. And also, like a lot of kids do, she cries when other people are sad. When kids do that, it's really kind of interesting. It's how they kind of pick up on the emotion. Um, but I do think that Gertie is an interesting addition to the story because she's more imaginative. So therefore, she's dressing up E.T. in clothes. That's what little girls like to do. She's playing with him, teaching him words.
I love the hiding scene with those two, with
Yeah.
the stuffed animals. It's so cute.
Well, the stuffed animal. I mean, she's got the mind of a little kid playing with E.T. like he's another kid.
Exactly.
Like it's not. It doesn't faze her at all. I mean, yes, she's scared when she meets him, but eventually she's like, he's just another person, and I enjoy spending time with him. And of course, we know that Drew would go on to have an amazing career. This is probably her first major film, and I think that certainly, these are child actors. I think that she delivers an honesty and sincerity, even if it is kind of annoying, because I think some little kids are annoying. It's just kind of goes with the territory. As before we move on, Chris, any final thoughts on Drew?
No,
Morris Gertie.
otherwise, when you put it that way, she pulls it fine, and I get it. And it started her career, and she was adorable, and she was the youngest person, or youngest person ever to appear as a guest star on Carson. It was Carson.
That's
Yes,
right.
that's
That's right.
right.
Yes.
This movie got her there. That
Yes, she got on
put her
Johnny
in there.
Carson with this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The
And she's
other.
very charming and quippy.
Oh yes. And now we get the older brother, Michael, played by Robert Naughton, I think he fits the older brother mold extremely well. I think that what he does is he's kind of obnoxious at first, E.T., like a lot of, or not E.T., but Elliott, like a lot of older brothers are, and he's got that, he's probably, what, 15, 16, so he's got that too cool for school kind of attitude.
Mm-hmm.
But over the course of the movie, you see him emotionally connect with E.T., and he cares about E.T., and the emotional moments devastate him just as much as they do his siblings, even though he's older and you'd think he would have oh, that's kid stuff, but he over time develops into a character that we really like, and then we don't think we're gonna like him at first. But we do like him, he ends up being a hero that kind of saves the day in many ways. So I do like the dynamic that all three of the kids have with E.T., but I'll start with you, Ryan. What are your thoughts on Michael as a character?
I mean, Michael, I really had no impression of him. To me, he didn't really feel like he was a character, at least during my early watches and my rewatches. I mean, the first time I watched him, he really made no impression on me until after E.T. died, when he was assisting Elliott and getting,
Yeah,
getting it back,
yeah.
breaking it out. But then on rewatches, I mean, once I think the last time I saw it was middle school. The last time I watched it from middle school, I can definitely see that. Yeah, he was in some ways, doing his best. I mean, yeah, he teased him, but I liked how he stands up for Ellie, especially when his friends were kind of like were teasing him at school.
Yeah.
So I do see, like, he's not really like meant to be a stereotypical big brother, kind of being a jerk to the kids. Just like, he wants responsibility, but at the same time, he doesn't see Elliot. He doesn't notice Elliot much until ET comes in life, and then now he's actually stepping up with responsibility. So he is a lot. So he does make more and more of an impression looking back at it.
Yeah, in terms of the kids, he's probably the one that evolves the most
Yes.
in this story. Chris, thoughts on Michael?
I actually found him overall to be the most complex character because when you're
Yeah.
dealing with the idea of a family in a broken home, that's not easy for a child to deal with.
Yeah,
It
especially a
isn't.
teenager.
It's not.
And so, yeah, he's a teenager. He's got two choices. He can rebel and fight against it, as you would expect a teenage boy to do, or he could step up and help and make a difference. And in his case, he does so subtly in the background that you don't even notice it. You think he's going to be a jerk of a big brother at first, as you would expect the stereotype to be, but he doesn't. He really takes all on it. And then, the end, when it culminates with saving E.T. and Elliott's lives, I'm very impressed with this young man.
Yeah, and he ultimately is the reason why they even escaped at all.
Yeah.
It's like, hey guys, get your bikes, meet us at the preschool.
Yeah,
We're gonna go do this thing.
And when the government agents show up, though, I mean, when they're like studying E.T. and Elliot, I mean, he is the one person there trying to tell them of the bond that those two have.
It's like, hey, they're connected. Don't mess with them.
Yeah, like he's trying to really help them understand, not to constantly do a lot of poking and prodding, but it's just more of like, if you want to understand, like here, I'm being forthright and honest with you. But then I do like, after when E.T. dies, he does kind of realize that there's nothing else anyone can do, and you're right, he steps up.
I love that too. When E.T. comes back to life, so Elliot goes into the little decontamination, and he tells Michael. And Michael jumps up and hits his head. It's a funny little beat, and you don't hear what they're saying to each other, but you see that Michael is clearly very, very happy. And what's interesting about this film is Elliot is still young enough, and he's very wise, rather, for a kid his age. But Michael is at that age, he's at that teenage crossroads of do you still have some of that childlike wonder? Or you've gotten to that age where you're like, oh, I'm too cool for that stuff. And he's kind of right in the middle, and I like the character. And when I was a little kid watching, his character didn't make much of an impression on me because I was more like Elliott's age or Gertie's age. I was younger. And then I think this time around, I did notice him a lot more because I'm like, yeah, I can identify with this character. Now, there's several other characters that I don't want to get in. We have Peter Coyote as Keys, who you think is going to be a bad guy, but turns out to be okay. And then you have Michael's friends, who helped save the day. Very much an inspiration for Stranger Things. With kids riding around their bikes doing all knows what. Well, the last character that I wanted to talk about is Mary, the mom, played by Dee Taylor. And when I was a kid, I didn't really pay much attention to her. But now that I'm more in the ballpark of her age, I noticed her a lot more in this time around. That she is like very much a frazzled mom. She's gone through the separation. She's a lot like Winona Ryder's character in Stranger Things. It's kind of at the end of her rope. She's a good mom.
Yes. Yeah.
Very loving, very caring. But you can also sense that she is very broken up inside. There's a lot of moments where she's just crying all the time. She doesn't want to really. She shows her emotions, but she doesn't want to freak the kids out by being too emotionally fragile around them. But she has these quiet moments where she goes off. And she's clearly busted up because it looks like their dad left her for another woman and they've been reeling ever since. And but she's totally believable as a mom. Feels like that very frazzled, yet still loving mom figure. It's very much like, hey, don't use those words in my house. Or who said you could order a pizza? Very much a mom.
You got to think too that this comes from a personal place for Spielberg.
Yeah,
Spielberg,
exactly.
when he was 14 years old, or 13, 14, his parents divorced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Dad is clearly
so
not in the picture.
actually, the idea for this film came from the imaginary friend that he had. But you can only imagine at those formative years when you lose your parents, and even though they may have been a part of his life, there's a disconnect that can happen.
And clearly, the dad is kind of distant.
Yeah, so I can only imagine what that's like for the mom. What that's like for her in 1980 when this thing wasn't so uncommon. We talk about how now that divorce and separation are so high in the United States, it hasn't changed since the 1980s.
Yeah,
it was
that was
readily,
really 70s, 80s, and on to today. You've seen a lot of these broken homes. So a detailer, or sorry, what is the actress's name? Dee Wallace. Wallace.
Yes.
I think she doesn't get a lot of credit because our focus is on the kids. But I think she gives maybe the best performance in the movie besides E.T. Because there really is that sense of momness to her. It's totally believable. And I love the bit that because we keep the language PG on this show, Elliott calls Michael something not very nice. And I love her reaction because she's laughing because she thinks it's funny, but she's realizing I can't show that it's funny because that's not appropriate to say. I love that reaction because it feels like that's a reaction a parent would have. And so she just feels very genuine and honest. And she's kind of oblivious to what's going on. That's because being a mom, she has to run in a bazillion different directions. But I think the shot that gets me emotionally is when the spaceship flies away and her reaction. It's a beautiful moment because I think that maybe she gains a sense of almost like her perspective changes. And she goes, well, I've got a lot of problems, yes, but the universe is so much bigger. And maybe in that moment, it gives her a sense of hope. So I really think that Dee Wallace deserves a lot of credit here. Just your guys' overall thoughts on her, really quick as we move on.
I agree with you, and I think more than that too, it's not just the hope, it's the realization of what her son has been fighting for and doing, and realizing that her son was doing all of this for this thing, this to her perspective, this thing. She doesn't
Maybe it's a sense
understand.
of I must have done something right to
Exactly.
teach my
Yeah.
kids to be empathetic.
There's a pride in when a parent can see their child doing something right for the sake of doing it right.
Yeah.
Seeing
I
that
mean,
they're
yeah,
actually growing up, like, and also from her seeing the bond, she's also coming to the realization that my child is going to be okay. But I'm also good because he's opening up. Because that's one thing with Henry throughout the start of this film. He's like I say, he's isolated. He's very
he's
shut,
very isolated, he's closed
and
off.
he's kind of shut down emotionally. That's why when you talk about, you keep reading, and you are right. It is about him learning empathy, and it does get forced on him. But he is learning to open himself up through empathy and emotionally. So because you do see from where he is at the start to where he is at the end, he really is truly opening up. I mean, because you do talk about the fact that Dad's been around, or talking about Dee's her performance when she's on the phone, and the dad's not around to at least take look after the kids when it's his time, or he's nowhere near to at least to be present. You can see that she's trying to maintain like composure, but the small cracks in her voice
Yeah.
when it
Oh,
comes
yeah.
when, like, he's in Mexico, or I can't do this. Like, she's trying hard to, she wants to break down, but she's trying to stay strong. And that's where I think maybe where Henry himself is kind of like where he's at. He's kind of like a little bit resembling his mother. He's trying to keep everything bottled up. So when when she does discover ET, you can even see herself. Everything's coming out now. Like, she's laying everything out, and seeing her son being looked at by these scientists. She's also really losing control. So I do like towards the end when ET is going home, Elliott is saying goodbye, and it's painful, it hurts. She knows now what she has to do.
Yeah.
You gotta
I
be there and
mean,
comfort him.
absolutely amazing. So it's a small cast. Not a lot of characters. This is not a big movie. But now we're going to talk about the screenplay. And really quick, what stood out to me watching this is a movie where the dialogue is almost like secondary. Like, you don't really even need dialogue to tell this story. In fact, everything the characters say, except maybe for E.T. saying E.T. phone home, is a line that doesn't really have any meaning because it's just the way people talk. The story is told, the storytelling as written in the screenplay, it's not the dialogue that carries the film. It's not like, say, Casablanca, where that's a very dialogue-driven movie. This is a movie that is visually and musically driven, that you almost don't even need the dialogue. And yet it manages to tell the story in a way that anybody can follow, and that you can almost take all the dialogue out, and this movie still works the way it does. I don't want to spend too much time on the screenplay other than this is visual storytelling. This is emotional storytelling. This is not storytelling in the idea of a lot of dialogue. Because sometimes when people think of screenplay or script, they think of only the dialogue. When the screenplay of a movie is so much bigger. So really quickly, Chris, we'll start with you. Just your thoughts on this very simple screenplay.
It's perfect that way. You don't need to overcomplicate this with extras and flourishes, and this film is exactly where it is. And what I love even more is it's not even very effects heavy. It tells the story. I've read this screenplay. You could read this screenplay exactly the way it is, follow the movie shot for shot, not have any problems. I love that when it is so plain and simple, and yet the feelings and emotions are clear and universal. This gets that across and does it in spades.
Ryan, your thoughts on the screenplay of E.T.?
I really majority of what Chris said, but one thing I do have to say, like when it comes to this film, the one thing with the screenplay is that it does focus on the little moments, not just E.T. learning to speak, but also in the direction, like in the script, like with E.T., exploring Elliott's home and then showing different signs of what he's feeling, kind of hinting to the audience what Elliott's feeling, like the start of that little bond there. Like it's those small moments mixed with
Oh,
um I was gonna say the oh my god. Oh no, wait, that's the I'm thinking of the deleted scene stuff. But mainly just the small stuff that's in the film where it really is taking its time to plant a seed, and then you see it really grow like later on towards the end of the film, or at least towards like the high in action,
like
the rise in
E.T.
action.
opens the umbrella
Yes.
and the
Or
scene cuts immediately to Elliott freaking out.
or him like with the plants, like
Mm-hmm.
the first time they're the camera, like it's always focusing on a dead plant, and then you do see with ET the first time he uses his abilities to make it grow.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do bring that back later on, when Elliot is talking to ET and walks away, the first thing he's noticing out of that corner of the eye, the small stuff, is a plant regrowing, showing
Yeah.
signs that he's alive. Like I said, it's the little things that
Oh,
really make it like really grow.
it's visual storytelling at its finest, and what I love about the structure of the film that comes from the screenplay is it takes its time. This is not a fast moving movie. This is you get all these very kind of simple scenes that are just kind of the right length. And it maybe feels slow compared to say more modern movies. But the fact that it does take its time with each moment is, I think, what gives the film its power, because if it were too fast, you wouldn't have that emotional payoff.
Yeah.
Chris, your thoughts on the screenplay, both the dialogue and the structure of the film?
It's perfect. I don't need it to worry about anything. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. I would not change a thing. This is a grade A piece of literature.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the next category we want to talk is the themes. Now, this is not a particularly deep movie. There aren't necessarily deep ideas. However, there are a few interesting ideas. We've discussed empathy. Another one is we discussed the broken home situation. Another theme that I would like to throw out, because we already talked about the other two, is I'm going to throw a little bit of a biblical reference here. Many times in the New Testament, Jesus says, you need to become like little children. And I think this movie illustrates what he's talking about. Well, you have all the adults running around trying to find ET. What you have is the acceptance of these kids. Well, just accepting ET as another person, with using their childlike sense of innocence that we adults sometimes lose, and that we have been, whether you believe in the words of Jesus or not, I think it's important that sometimes we as adults try to become like little children, because as we see in ET, little children are more accepting, they're more inclined to reach out instead of put barriers between them and other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we all could deal. We all could stand to learn a great lesson from that. Ryan, your thoughts on that theme?
I do want to add on. I do want to take from what you're saying that there are
Mm-hmm.
definitely moments in this film that really does support that really support what you're saying, especially when I think of Keys, when you first finally get to see his face, he really like he when he says that Ellie, I've been waiting for this since I was 10 and I'm glad he
Mm-hmm.
found you. That definitely looks like with Keys, he is someone as an adult who has not let go of that part of him that
That's
was
a
a
good point.
child.
That's an excellent point.
And it makes a lot of sense why you see him towards the end. Like even when ET's going home, he's not trying to get the rest of the government after them. He comes to understand, like, yeah, he's not meant to be here. He immediately accepts ET as well. I mean,
Um,
he's not like letting go of anything, but he's kind of coming to the understanding of something like this special, something that's unique. It's not meant for adults to understand.
I think you make an excellent point. I had not considered that, and now that you mention it, the first like half of the movie when we see Keys, we see him from the waist down with the keys on his belt. We think of him as this kind of scary adult, and then there's a switch. Once ET is in the custody of the government, you finally see Keys for the first time. And while the camera doesn't really dwell on the other adults, it does on Keys, because you're right, that he still maintains that childlike wonder and innocence that is necessary to understand ET, but the other adults just don't have. Chris, your thoughts on the idea of childhood versus adulthood here?
I want to bring up a quote from Nelson Mandela.
Mm-hmm.
No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. No one is born that way.
Mm-hmm.
When you say go back to being a child, I'm reminded of Mandela. People must learn to hate. But if they can learn to hate, they can also be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite, like a child to water.
Mm, excellent.
Like, yeah, that's absolutely 100%. When you said that about the New Testament, it reminded me a couple weeks ago, this was the last quote I gave my students. Every week, Mondays, I give them a fresh quote.
Mm,
This is the quote I gave them.
yeah,
And
and
it's
I
the,
think
okay.
you're right, because Gertie and Elliot are still at that age where they love.
Mhm.
Michael is kind of at that transition point, but he
But
ultimately ends up loving ET.
it's like a point like with teenagers, when they cross that threshold of
Yeah,
growing up, like leaving childhood behind, they're in that middle point to where they're right behind child is behind them, and they're taking step forwards into adults to becoming an adult. And of course, one thing with lots of us as teenagers, we want to hurry and grow up, but you do see, at least with Michael, that when ET came in, he at the start he really was really in a rush to grow up, but he had no idea what it would mean. So
yeah,
ET was kind of that little that little stop sign to put him to freeze him in place. So
yeah,
at least the openness and the lovingness of childhood that we do see through Elliot and Gertie, it starts to reach to him. So he
yeah.
is kind of more like a more fully formed person.
And he allows, instead of going with the more hard edge, oh, I'm too cool for that, he allows that more childlike innocence to take over. This is a very much a movie about peace and coexistence. Even Spielberg showed this film to the UN and received a special peace prize from it.
Mhm.
This is a movie about why can't we just get along? And part of the idea of let's all get along is we need to be more like children, or more open and accepting of others. That's really, to me, the strongest um theme here, as well as also the theme of symbiosis, where what happens to ET affects Elliott, and vice versa. What happens to each one of us is going to affect other people. That's how the universe operates. And so this is very much a hopeful film about our ability to coexist peacefully with people who are different.
One of the main things of empathy. I
Hmm.
feel what you feel. You're in
Exactly.
pain. I feel your pain. If you are hurt, I feel it too. I mean,
Yep.
empathy, compassion,
Hmm.
and those are like those two are really in kind hand in hand, and you see it.
Ouch.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like it is like even that moment too with the ouch. You do see when he says that kids are kind of like trying to shush him down. Like they're not hearing him.
Oh yeah,
So
when he thinks that Michael's got a real knife stuck through his head. And,
yeah, but
ouch.
but then but it's also like with his small dialogue. The more he starts speaking, I mean, Gertie's like she's genuinely curious. Michael, he's open to it. And then we see with Elliot, yeah, he's amazed by it, but also the more he talks, kind of like with kids when they're speaking, you kind of want them like, okay, calm down. All right, slow don't talk too much. But then the more and more with ET, they bond to him. And it's like, yeah, they're not trying to ignore him, but they are finally hearing him.
Yeah.
So that's why I like that exchange between him and the Elliot at the end. Elliot's like, I don't want you to go, but then
Yeah.
he
I'll
really
be right here.
and that's all he had to say for Elliot to understand. I'm not leaving you.
Yeah. Yep. No, exactly.
That's I think that's another theme I like with this movie. It's about emotional maturity,
Yeah. Yeah.
understanding your emotions, because as children, these emotions are just very raw to us. They come in at full force. We kind of hope for adults or like older kids to help us understand, but in most of our cases, we're kind of navigating this road alone.
Hmm.
So that's the one thing I do like with the bond between E.T. and Elliot. Elliot's also experiencing emotion very raw, and so I mean, he's experiencing raw emotion. Then Elliot, in a way, is kind of like re-experiencing that. So then when you do have that moment with ET like dying or ET being sick, Elliot is so raw with emotion. It's almost like he's overloaded with that. Like he's in a way with the dad not being present,
Hmm.
not being able to really maybe communicate with his mom. You almost feel like this is a kid wanting the comfort, the loving comfort of a parent with him. So he is latching on. That's why it's like a symbiotic bond between the two of them. It's really raw there. So I love it. God, just really thinking about and rewatching it, looking back at this stuff. It's really Spielberg's really trying to show us how important it is for kids to truly develop into emotionally healthy people.
Yeah. Very, very well said. Very well. I mean, the themes here are simple, but they are profound. The next thing we want to talk about is we have to talk about it, the music. John Williams' magnificent Oscar-winning score. This was his fourth Oscar, I think, um,
Mhm.
that he won, and this is. I mean, we all know the famous flying themes, but there's other themes and moments that are musically very impressive. The this is like John Williams at maybe his best, or at least one of his best scores. The nature of how it creates, it has creepy themes, it has very hopeful themes. There are moments where there's no music at all, like after E.T. dies. I think it's a great choice.
Yeah.
There are moments where you see E.T. looking out of the trees that feel very majestic and very fun, and then you have the Halloween trick-or-treating theme. And then of course the triumphant flying scene. Um which we get to hear twice in the film. And it's like one of those moments that it's movie magic, those moments. John Williams, of course, is a genius. And this film, so much of what gives it lift is the music. We'll start with you, Chris. The music of Maestro John Williams.
I never have anything ill to say of Mr. Williams. All I can say is, John Williams, please, Plasco, please collect all of my money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ryan, your thoughts on the score?
I mean, as an adult, I truly can appreciate this score. But I won't lie, like, yeah, flying and the ending song, those were, of course, they clearly stuck in my head because of the way the score was able to really rile up the emotion. But
Mm,
even then on listening to just that original track list, like, yeah, it's like literally I'm really traveling back in time listening when I'm thinking of this film. But regardless, if there's ever a moment for me to finally watch John Williams perform like in a live orchestra setting, which I know he does on multiple occasions, but if I ever had the opportunity to jump at it, I would jump at it like it was my last day on earth.
yeah. And that finale is one of the most extraordinary movie finales. Use of the drums, use of the big bombastic themes. I mean, it's amazing. It's also very intimate score. It's got some great use of harp music and bell music. And very like when E.T. is first connecting with Elliott. There's some beautiful harp music. I mean, it's just a gorgeous score from beginning to end. Right, a deserved Oscar for John Williams. And then we'll end on this, the spectacle. This is a great looking film. Now, it's not great cinematography in the sense of like Lawrence of Arabia or a big epic sweeping film, but it is a very beautiful looking movie. But the real highlight, the strongest element of the spectacle of this film is E.T. himself. When we talked about him, because this movie is light on visual effects, but with E.T., he's probably the most interesting. This film did win Best Visual Effects at the Academy Awards, mostly for the creation of E.T., and we've already talked about it. Well, we won't spend too much time on it, but E.T. comes to life as a fully realized character. Anything to add, gentlemen, as we wrap up here?
That flight scene is
Yes,
beautiful,
yes.
breathtaking. Combine it with John Williams' score. Easily, probably, I would consider it the climax, the denouement, everything in the film, and probably the most iconic thing about this film is between the score and that scene. In fact,
E.T. with Elliott flying across the moon, yeah.
so Amblin
And the
Entertainment
kids'
produces this
reactions as
film.
well.
Amblin Entertainment produces this
Yes.
film. And
Mhm.
after the success of E.T., what then becomes the logo of Amblin, even to
Yep.
this day?
Elliott and E.T.
Yes, it
flying
is.
across the moon.
Yep.
Extraordinary, extraordinary. All right, guys. Well, that brings us to the end of E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. I think it's a masterpiece. I really do. And unlike a lot of other movies we call masterpieces, this might be the most simple ever made to be called a masterpiece. 1982 was an extraordinary year for film. A lot of movies we grew up with, this one in particular. But I hope that this film has had an effect for the better on those who grew up with it. And sometimes we need to go back to the lessons it reinforces. And Steven Spielberg is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, and this film is one of the reasons why. So, Captain Ingle, that is the end of my thoughts and my lecture, as we'll call it. So we'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank Ryan for coming in and sharing with us on E.T. We adore this film, and I think you do too, Ryan. And I'm really glad you're here. Got anything to plug?
Um, I don't. I mean, honestly, it's mostly like just sparing, well, I won't say sparing projects. It's just sort of stuff I do on occasion, but I'll share them anyway. I'm current if anyone listening, other than just being a fan of Star Trek, Star Wars, or of this movie ET, regarding if you're a sports fan, if you're a fan of wrestling, I do occasionally co-host a podcast with my good friend James Shimo and my friend Brenton McPherson. It's called
Yeah.
Wrestling Ramblings and Rages podcast, where we kind of like to give our 2 cents in on wrestling news. We give top 10 lists, or even we do reviews of old wrestling pay-per-views. Really try to show our passion as wrestling fans. And I'll be honest, because it's called Ramblings in there's going to be some rants that go in with sometimes of our overall reactions or overall kind of like takes. So, but it's nothing too extreme. But it's only all in good fun when we get together.
And of course, join me and Ryan at Dorina's Coven.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you again, Ryan, so much for joining us. As I said, all this summer, we are doing 80s sci-fi films. Next month at the end of June, which will release at the beginning of July, we are taking a look at, I think, the most underrated of all the films we're going to look at, The Explorers. It's a film that I remember watching frequently when I was a kid. But again, from the focus of kids, I like to think of it as Goonies in space.
Goonies in space.
Actually, I think it predates Goonies by a year.
Yeah, a couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, but
Wow.
I can't wait to review that with you. And then, of course, month after that, we're taking a look at The Last Starfighter.
Yes.
Love it. And then finally, my personal favorite Mel Brooks film, Spaceballs.
Everybody got that?
Oh, my favorite one though, still, and I can't quote it all the way. Have you found anything yet? And Tim Russ.
We ain't found
Nothing. We ain't found nothing.
Actually, when I was a kid, it was dubbed to nothing. But I can read lips.
From the
Oh no,
desert.
yeah. I remember like watching it on cable TV.
We've been jammed.
Raspberry. Only
Yeah.
one man would dare give us the raspberry. All right.
Moon Star.
I can't wait till the end of August. That's going to be fun.
Yeah.
I love him. Anyway, next week we are back on the Trek, back on Trek, as it were. And we'll be in Star Trek Voyager, the two-parter, season 3, episodes 8 and 9, Futures End.
Oh yeah.
I love this episode. I think this was a turning point for Voyager. It really
And Sarah Silverman in Voyager.
It is Sarah Silverman, and she's not irritating. No, but we'll take a look at that.
Well, look at that.
Next week. Brennan, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm going to call it that. Running Mystical. You can follow me also on Blue Sky and Facebook at Running Noir. Threads and Instagram at Running Blue. And you can follow this podcast under Page Turners They Were Not on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.
And of course, you can find me here. And you can also find me on Twitch and Twitter at Ingle1984. But as always, we end every episode. Kapla, and live long and prosper.
I'll be right here.